All right, moving on to the second company, I would like to introduce Benny Lakunishok, CEO and co-founder of Zero Networks.
Hi, I'm Benny. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zero Networks. Zero Networks is a patent-pending unique network prevention solution that is also seamless to the users. I want to start with a quote from Gartner. Assuming all internal systems are trusted leads to an easy lateral spread of attacks. To this day, this is the leading cause of breaches being so extensive and damaging. What Gartner is saying here is basically a problem we all share, the excessive trust inside all of our corporate networks, where an attacker or commodity malware gains access to one machine and from there can spread to the entire network. Ideally, this would have been solved if for every connection there would have been a two-factor authentication, a 2FA authentication using the phone before the connection can get established. I know of only one company in the world that has implemented such a drastic approach. That company is Google. Inside of Google's network, basically every machine has its host-based firewall to completely block all incoming connection. In order for a connection to take place, the user on the source machine actually needs to authenticate using their phone before the connection can get established. And only after the user is validated will the firewall on the target machine be opened for that specific user, for that specific connection. While this is great for security, this is very taxing for the users, because now for every connection inside the network, the users has to go through this cumbersome 2FA experience. So now the security team is happy, but our end users are not as happy. And this is why most of us would not implement such an approach. With Zero Networks, we're going to make a smart trade-off here to make sure we are at the same level of security without compromising on the end user experience. Think about it for a second. If you take your average user, how many different machines does that user accesses on a week or a month, let's say? 5 different machines, 10 different machines, 20 different machines. In any case, it's a very small part of the network that those users are accessing. The rest of the network, let's say more than 99% of the network, are actually machines where that specific user is not accessing. Let's compare these two parts of the network with two very important parameters. One, the benefit of actually securing that part of the network with 2FA versus what is the tax, what is the user experience cost when using 2FA to that part of the network. So for the first group, since it's a very small part of the network, the benefit here is actually very low. As to the user experience cost, that is actually very high. Although it's a few machines, those are very highly used machines, so the tax or the experience here is very, very high. As for the second group, the benefit here is very, very high because we're talking about more than 99% of the network, and this is something that can really stop attacks from spreading within the network. And in terms of the experience, since any given user is actually not accessing most of the network, then that experience is very, very good. Google is actually protecting both sets of groups or all of the machines on the expense of the user experience. With Zero Networks, we are going to make a smart trade-off to secure 99% of the network without disturbing the user that much. So now the security team is happy, as well as our end users. And now we can implement such an approach. So how are we doing this? Zero Network is an agentless solution. We integrate with Active Directory and other identity providers. We integrate with your firewall infrastructure as well as your host-based firewalls and DNS to learn how our users and machines behaving. What are the frequent connections and what are the infrequent connections? And by doing that, we can adapt ourselves to your network and in a very efficient way secure the network. We also integrate with other security providers to understand who are the risky users. By that, we can also set more frequent 2FA procedures to users at risk, and by doing that, we can basically mitigate that risk being spread all over your network. To sum up, now you can have it both ways. You can have the security team happy, and you can have the end users happy. Zero Networks is simple to set up, simple to operate, and has a unique automatic approach to adapt itself to your network. We use a patent-pending technique to secure more than 99% of your network without disturbing the users. We're a fast-growing startup and would love if you would contact us if you have any questions or want to try us out. Thank you.
So, Benny, I think you've hit on what's going to be the largest challenge you have, which is that user experience. Too often we see users who have click fatigue. Little Snitch was probably one of the earliest products in this space that had users, click to say, yes, I want to go to that site, I want to go to this site, and functionally it's what kept it out of the enterprise. Was no user really wanted to deal with that. And you're going to be somewhat reliant on your enterprises as you go to market. How are you going to make sure that you don't get the reputation of being that horrible product nobody actually wants to use, and instead the one that makes people look like emoji?
That's a great question. So multiple answers to that. First of all, I didn't mention because we don't have enough time for that, but some of the details here is we also do peer group analysis so that if we are all in a peer, after a learning period, only one of us needs to exhibit a certain behavior so that other users won't get that disruption. So that's one of the things to help minimize the amount of 2FAs. Also, since we are a prevention solution, we have a learning period, which will also minimize those kind of things. Plus, before actually turning on the switch to enable that prevention, you have a simulation period where we visualize what will be allowed, what will be blocked, what statistically, how many users are going to feel that 2FA experience on the expense of having a larger part or a smaller part of the network open. And you can select and change that before you actually do something. So we help visualize that. Another thing I wanted to mention is that all of the internet connections, we are not safeguarding. So all of those, I'm accessing that URL or that URL, we're not in that game. We're not a Caspi player. We're only safeguarding the internal resources, which will, again, with the simulation, with the learning period, peer group analysis is something that will be reduced drastically in terms of the amount of MFAs we give. And lastly, it's not a yes-no question. It's like once in a while, and that's the trick here, we're going to ask, hey, you have done something really suspicious, like the Gmail, let's say, message when you log on from a suspicious machine. Do you want to authenticate using your phone? Is that really you? So all of that is basically the answers to that question.
So it's a challenge to get through any network security discussion without mentioning zero trust, unless it's intentional. So my assumption is that you intentionally did not say anything about zero trust, and so can you speak to that just a bit?
Sure, yeah. So the term zero trust is very overloaded and very loosely used. If you look at some of the players that are talking about it, and mainly the software-defined perimeter players, they are mainly doing zero trust from the outside of the network to the inside of the network. What we're doing is completely different. We're looking just at the internal part of the network. So that's why I haven't mentioned that. And there are other players, for example, the microsegmentation players or the microsegmentation market, which they are doing kind of a zero trust, but only inside the data center, only east-west traffic between servers. That's also something that we are not doing. We are focusing mainly on client machines to client machines. That's where your commodity malware spreads, the ransomwares, the WannaCries of the world, and also client to server machines. We're doing it mainly because, well, A, 71% of all attacks start with the client machine, 100% of all commodity malware start with the client machine, and B, more importantly for us, we have the patent-pending method to override an automatic network rule with the user consent, basically, so that they can go and do whatever they want while the network is still protected.
So security and happy users sounds fantastic, right? I'd be happy with less ticked off. So tell me what happens when the users change jobs. Is there any kind of learning, like I completely have a new job tomorrow. I go from finance to HR. What then?
So you're probably gonna, so based on the peer group, so there are, I'm guessing that the problem here or the risk is if I'm changing a new role, I'm going to have different access patterns potentially.
Completely.
Yeah, and then what would the experience of that user look like? So there are two ways to look at it. Worst case scenario, you're going to get an MFA when you access the new finance server, let's say, and depending on the setting, like by default, we'll give you a grace of 30 days to not get a 2FA for that server because we've just seen that you as a human being said that you want to do that. So there is no reason for us to ask again. You can change that if you want. So that's worst case scenario for the 5 to 10 servers that within the period of the next few weeks in your new role, you would get 2FAs for those. The best side of this is that as part of the peer group analysis, that would be reduced drastically because we saw that you moved to other Active Directory groups or in the other identity providers, you need the authorization. So we see those changes and we then group you to other peers that already have access to those machines. So that's like best scenario, worst case scenario.
In order to get your tool installed, doesn't work. So in order to, now it works. In order to get your tool installed, you need to get past the head of network operations. And by telling him that it is simple to install wouldn't do the trick. So how would you convince the head of network operations to install your tool, to adopt your technology actually?
So we would have like the detailed discussion of what's entailed in that, and it's a cloud service you enroll, and it integrates with the existing environment. We can do it, in a small lab or something that they can see and experience that themselves before going and do it in production. And even in production, we can just start small. Let's start with, 10 VM machines that are in production but are tests, or a few machines of the IT to experience that behavior before going forward. And actually, in those tests, we can show the value here by having, let's take a few machines, have them unpatched, put WannaCry, see that it cannot spread. Or put the domain admin credentials here and see that the domain admin, the most powerful user in the network, cannot spread to anywhere now. So that's kind of how we see that.
Do have another question. Microsoft is heavily investing in endpoint security. Do you see that as a threat for your value proposition in the near future?
I actually see all of the endpoint, not just Microsoft's. I came from Microsoft, so I'm very familiar with that, by the way, but I see the entire endpoint market as an opportunity to integrate, to get risk levels from them. Should we MFA users at risk or machines at risk more than other machines? So I see that as an opportunity to do better things together.
What if I don't have a mobile device?
Sorry?
What if I don't have a mobile device? How am I MFAing then?
So the downgrade for people that don't have a mobile phone is we need to remember what we want to do here with the 2FA. We just want to make sure this is a human being that's actually doing that and not a malware. So there are two downgrades we are actually developing right now. One of them is CAPTCHA, which is a user and not a malware. And the second one is also via email, but some of our customers are less fond with that and more want to rely on the CAPTCHA.
Do you see yourself being complementary to any other technology, like maybe access governance or something, user behavioral analytics? I mean, do you see yourself partnering maybe with some other companies?
So there is the potential to partner with UEBA players, although they are not looking at the network level. It depends on which. If you're talking about Exabeam, Securonix, I came from Aorato, another UEBA player that was acquired by Microsoft. So there is some potential there. We potentially can also be partnering with the networking stack, like Cisco, or Palo Alto Networks, or Checkpoint. Actually, I had a discussion with them about that and how to partner and what can we do in that space there. Not sure if that answers the question. Actually, I have a quick question for you. What do you think about the network prevention space, where it's going? Any trends or thoughts on that?
Well, so it's interesting because when we talk about zero trust, usually we talk about two different spaces. And one is the software-defined perimeter, where we say, let's kick the clients out of our network entirely and verify every piece of access that they're doing. And one of which is network segmentation in the data center. And you've taken this interesting hybrid approach of saying, well, let's do the network segmentation on the clients, but keep them inside. So I think your challenge is you'll have competitors who are pushing, move the client outside the network. Full disclosure, I'm going to be one of them. But you're going to have companies that aren't comfortable with that they're going to have systems that they never want to have outside their firewall. So I think that gives you a potential access play right there.
Okay, interesting.
All right, thank you very much, Benny.
Thank you.
And Zero Networks.